Thank you so much for that, Ralph. Really good to be with you all today. Thanks a lot for joining us. Thanks a lot to Ralph, thanks to Emma, thanks to Ken for putting this event together and for getting us as a community together. Really loved the way that Ralph ended. What we should all be, and I think he's a great example of that, to be honest. What we really should all be doing is we should be learning, we should be continuously developing, we should be continuously building, we should be continuously pushing the boundaries. And one of the things that has always excited me about this community specifically is that that's what it's all about. It's about learning and it's about developing, and it's about providing a space for that and a space for sharing and collaborating. So yeah, thank you to the community. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for everyone who's making the time today. And we hope that you find the day useful. For context, my name is Mo. I'm based here in London. I'm speaking to you from here today. I am one of the co-founders of a company called Mortar, and you'll be hearing a bit more about our mission in a bit. But fundamentally, we really believe in the importance of data for the industry. We think the data has the potential to help us reimagine how we approach workflows within the industry today. And that's exactly why we've been really excited to sponsor and to this stage as a whole, because we think really for the industry to get where we've always wanted to get, where we've always wanted it to get to as people who are passionate about BIM, we need to go beyond the model and the visualizations. And we really need to start focusing on data and on making data work for the industry and to support informed decision making. So I'm really glad to have you join us today. Really looking forward to the event, and I hope you find the event useful. We have a really exciting lineup, both in the first half of the day and in the second half of the day. You'll be hearing from different speakers throughout the day, and then we'll be having a panel together where we discuss things and so on and so forth. So please do drop in any questions that you have during the day. Drop them into the chat. Please do discuss with each other. Please do engage with us, because we would love to engage with you as well. And again, thank you for making it today. What I'll do now is I'm going to share screen. Awesome. I think you should be able to see my screen now. So yeah. Thank you again. Thanks, Ken. Thank you again. Thanks for joining us. My talk today is going to focus on data as Mortar and how it can help us connect workflows together in order to transform workflows within architecture, engineering, and construction, and the built environment more broadly. Now, first, I want to start with back of the envelope number, effectively, we came up with just estimating what happens when things go really wrong within projects, especially from a main contractor's perspective. And this is a bit of an extreme scenario. But if you were to take a £400 million project or a $400 million project that's meant to last 4 years, and it were to then get delayed by a year, and we were then to have additional overheads as a result of that year, delayed payments and penalties, disputes and legal, and rework. All examples of things that I'm sure you've seen in one place or the other. The number can be quite substantial. It can be anywhere between 20 and 40 million. And if you think about that, that number would equate to 2 to 4% of a contractor that turns over around $1 billion or £1 billion a year, which then translates to 2 to 4% of their turnover. And what we all know is that contractors' margins are in that region. So one very big mistake in a project that goes uncaught and that then leads to a domino effect can then wipe out that contractor's margins. I'm not saying that always happens. I'm saying it could happen, and it is happening, and that's why we're seeing some contractors file for bankruptcy and so on and so forth. And I think it's really, really important to ground it with these numbers because fundamentally, we think this is where it's all about. There is a lot of risk within the industry, and then that risk can have massive consequences on the companies that are delivering this work. But even if you were to look at other players, you were to look at design firms, you were to look at owners, there are equally large numbers that equate with this. One of the things that I increasingly think about is owners. And when we think of owners, ultimately they're building things because they want to generate revenue. If I'm a tech company these days, I want to build a data center and I need that to get that up and running as fast as possible. And every day that I haven't, that data center isn't ready, that's lost revenue potential. When I look at things like, for example, retail, every day a store is late, that's revenue that's lost. When you look at energy, every day that's late, that's revenue that's lost, and so on and so forth. So there is real value in making sure that we're building things on time and we're delivering them according to plan and we're delivering them correctly. And if we don't, there are some very serious numbers that can be associated with that. Now, someone can nitpick and go, the number is a bit extreme and so on and so forth. What I'm trying to do here is, if you speak to any executive within the industry, they understand that these numbers, the risk that they have is really huge. And I think in information management, we haven't necessarily focused on risk to the extent that we should. And I think that's partially because there is a lot more of that in data, as we'll be speaking about in a second. But it also goes beyond these numbers. It goes into things like productivity. We're wasting a lot of time and we're wasting a lot of resource doing a range of manual tasks. Building safety, if you're here in the UK, the Building Safety Act is driving a lot as a result of the tragedy that happened in Grenfell a few years back. But it's equally the same all over. Any high-rise building that you have in any region really is at risk. Delivering building safety is extremely important, and there are many administrative and bureaucratic processes that get put in place in order to ensure that we're delivering safely. Handover is another very big challenge. Making sure that we have all of the information that we need and all of the data that we need in order to hand over that asset so that the owner can operate it. That's a massive challenge that many of us talk about. Carbon, understanding our carbon footprint, optimizing our carbon footprint and our resource use is again a topic that is very important and that many face challenges and a theme that's often discussed within the industry. Two that I find really interesting, that I feel we don't talk about enough, are accountability and trust. So in many ways, a lot of what happens today is I have work to do, but it's very difficult as a supply chain member or as a team member. But the roles and responsibilities and the accountability and the traceability of what has happened is lost. And as a result of that, there's a lot of duplicate work that ends up happening. And equally, the different parties don't always necessarily trust each other, which then means they're all doing duplicate checks and they're all doing duplicate reports, and you have the same people collecting the same data in different ways. And all of that ends up creating more waste and more confusion even within the industry. But in many ways, I see these challenges and the numbers that I was talking about earlier as symptoms. And I see them as symptoms to a problem that many of us are familiar with today, which is the fact that we are stuck in reactive mode due to poor visibility and due to poor data handling. What we have in every single project are a range of stakeholders. We have design managers, we have information managers, we have commercial managers, sustainability managers, project managers, and it goes on. And every single one of these stakeholders has questions, and they have responsibilities, as we mentioned earlier. So if I'm someone in design, I want to understand the design progress of my project. If I'm in information management, I want to understand that the information I have is complete and is fit for purpose. I want to know that a project is within budget, and I want to be able to understand how my supply chain is performing. From a quality perspective, I need to understand that I'm complying with my ISOs, not just 19650, but 9001 and all of the other suite of standards that we have to follow as organizations and as projects. And then finally, if I'm in sustainability, I need to understand not only do I need to know the forecasted carbon footprint, I also need to know what was my actual carbon footprint, and I need to be able to evidence that. And the challenge that we have today is that to answer any of these questions, there is data in all kinds of places. It's lost in many different spreadsheets and Word documents. It's lost in disconnected systems, ranging from the Autodesk construction clouds to the ACONXs, to your ERP, to your accounting system, to your waste system, to your field system, and so on and so forth. And as a result, we need to spend time data wrangling, pulling data from these different places, checking and making sure that it's appropriate, putting it together into a spreadsheet, uploading it into a Power BI dashboard, and so on and so forth. And all of that takes time, and all of that introduces more and more risk. Where we think the industry should go, and there have been many interpretations of this, I would say, within the industry, broadly speaking, but fundamentally, we think the data should act as mortar. We should be connecting workflows to transform architecture, engineering, and construction, and the built environment more broadly. Rather than having many different silo trackers for the different teams and many siloed data sets for planned versus actual, we should be connecting these together. So I should have, and I should be able to track my requirements, my cost, my carbon, my time, my design, my construction, my operation if I'm an owner. I need to be able to use data to inform supply chain tracking, workforce tracking, material tracking, and assets tracking. A lot of this data already exists in various systems, and we'll talk about that in a second. But then there are interface areas like information management, risk management, and change management. Ideally, what should happen is for every single one of these trackers, I should be able to draw upon consistent sets of data from sources of truth effectively. So for when should I be delivering the project? I should use my P6 schedule or my ASTA project schedule. For my documents, I should be able to draw upon what's in ACONX or what's in ACC or what's in Viewpoint or what's in any of the document management systems. For finance, I should be able to draw from my ERP, my enterprise resource planning system, or my accounting system. Looking ahead, you may want to derive data from things like IoT if you're an owner, especially. And then we have all of the data that gets created in the field, from the timesheets to the inspections to the material delivery notes and so on and so forth. And every single one of these trackers should be able to pull data from these consistent sources of truth. And if we do, we would all then be singing of the same hymn sheet, so to speak, because we'd be getting the data and the consistent data to tell a consistent story about how the project is doing. But I think what also gets exciting is if we get this right, and if we move into a world where we're not looking at files anymore, and we're not looking at geometry anymore, we're looking at data, we can start bridging the gaps between what we've had as silos. And I like giving a few examples here. One of my favorite is risk management, mainly because every single one of us has dealt or has seen a risk register at some point. If you think about risk today, what happens is someone goes into a risk register and writes that work package X is at risk of being delayed because deliverable Y hasn't been reviewed. But if you think about it, that data is already available in a design deliverable tracker. I shouldn't have to enter any of this information manually. I should be able to programmatically pick this up because I have linked in that to that risk. And then I can even take it a step further, because if I've linked it to the work packages, and the work packages are linked to a cost tracker or my payment schedule, I can then start on putting a monetary figure to that risk, and I can start doing that automatically. So these things that I would have needed to jump between many different teams in order to get to, if I've started linking these trackers together, if I've started linking this data together, I can start reimagining these processes fundamentally as a person or as a project or as an organization. Another example I like looking at is change management. So change is notoriously difficult. No one wants to fill in a change tracker. Everyone has to fill in the change tracker in one way or the other, but people can slip and people can make mistakes. And then there's a range of analysis that has to happen when it comes to change. So an example here could be my client has changed their requirements. Once they've changed their requirements, what I want to be able to understand is what's the impact that that has had on design that I've delivered on design that I will be delivering. And then based on that, I can start understanding what is the cost impact and time impact of that change and so on and so forth. Once I've done all of this, and ideally over time, and I won't do that in one day, right? But as we move to a world where data really starts acting as Mortar and we connect workflows together, we can then start deriving insight from this data. And that could be in Power BI dashboards, that could be in the models, that could be in GIS, or that could be in AI. And I'll be talking a bit more about that in a second. I like starting here because it's important to contextualize that every single function in a project has data. I have data for requirements, I have data for cost, I have data for design, and so on and so forth. But if we look at the next slide, this starts focusing a lot more on information management and processes that we're familiar in as people who are members of this community. And those too have the potential to be transformed with data. So really commonly what we'll see are things like exchange information requirements, responsibility matrices, controls and commercials trackers, master information delivery plans, and then we'll have data in any of these other systems that we have to interface with. And as information managers, we have access to that data. That data does exist, but it's not connected with each other, or at least not well. We don't often connect our master information delivery plans well enough to the reference data sets that we should have, or to the responsibility matrices that we have, or to the requirements that come out of the client in order to maintain the traceability that we need to show the client that we're delivering what we need to deliver Most importantly, we're not connecting it to project controls and commercial functions, which is one of the key ways that we start informing how how we're performing as a project and whether we're on budget or not. And then once we have these information delivery plans or we have these deliverables trackers, we should ideally be able to directly pull data from various systems. That could be the ACCs, that could be the project wises, that could be the A sites. And we should then be able to use that to automatically track plan versus actual. No one should have to go in and fill in what they've delivered as work. There is already data in many of these systems to inform and to let us know what has actually been delivered. The problem is we don't connect these data sets together. So even as information managers, we're often sitting on a lot of data within these spreadsheets and within these systems that remains untapped and that we're not using to its full potential. And if we start connecting these things together, what we can start doing is we can start automatically tracking planned versus actual. We can reduce risk. I think most importantly from my end, we can have near real-time visibility and leading indicators on performance. One of the things I like bringing up here is if you speak to any head of IT, for example, or head of data in a company, one of the very first things they'll integrate with is the finance system. Every executive wants to get on top of finance. They want to know how much money they're making, what their cash flow situation is like, so that they maintain growth and so on and so forth. But finance is often what's in the accounting system is a lagging indicator of performance. I invoice based on the work that I've completed. My payment application on it is basically based on what work I've delivered. So from an information management perspective, if we're making sure that we're staying on top of all of the handover data, all of the design deliverables, and so on and so forth, we can de-risk commercials and we can provide leading indicators on what will be paid and on how that project is performing and so on and so forth. And in doing all of that, that makes the whole function much, much, much more important than it is today. And it provides a language that starts resonating with the executives in order to implement these things as beyond a checkbox exercise. And once we've done that, we should use data as a foundation to derive insight by pulling it into various systems. We talk a lot about this, and the name of the community as a whole is driven by BIM. But BIM is about the data that's within it, and that's really what I was speaking about earlier. We should be able to take some design data from the BIM model. We can also then visualize back. Sometimes I want to be able to see the progress of my material and the progress of my design visually on the building that I will be building. So it's a visualization mechanism. But sometimes for other things, I may want to visualize in something like Power BI, because it just makes most sense to be able to see how my deliverables are doing on something like a traditional dashboard. If I'm an asset owner, especially if I'm in the infrastructure space, I'll probably want to look at GIS and geographic information systems. Again, that should be informed by data. And then increasingly, I'm sure many of us are starting to look at, we were actually just speaking 5 minutes before the event started. Ralph was saying, don't know how we lived before ChatGPT. So many of us are starting to explore that, and people are starting to say AI is going to save us. But fundamentally, I need data in order to get answers to my questions. And I need connected data, ideally, that can very quickly get to ChatGPT or Copilot or any bespoke AI that you may be looking at in order to inform my decisions and in order to answer these questions. And if we do all of this, if we start really using data as Mortar, we can drive performance within our projects. We can reduce risk. We can save time from people who are spending at least 20 to 30% of their time on data wrangling and on pulling data and on making sure that it's consistent and so on and so forth. We'll have more consistent and standardized ways of working across our projects and across our supply chains. We'll have visibility and insight on performance. And then, as we were just discussing, increasingly important, will be future-proof. We'll be ready for Industry 4.0. We'll be ready for things like AI in order to make the best use of it. But how do we get there? To get there, we need to manage data effectively. And within, to do that, there is a range of things that we need. The first is we need process-based standards. We need to know, how do we ask for information and for data? How do we plan it? How do we deliver it? How do we assure it? We need to set rules and a process. And ISO 19650, the series as a whole, provides us a framework for that. If we're looking at capital delivery, we're looking at part 2. If we're looking at operation, we're looking at part 3, and so on and so forth. So first, we need standards. We have those. We understand those. We can start taking those, and we can start applying them in order to understand how we should manage the flow of information. The second thing that we need is information models. Now, there's a wide range of types of information models, depending on where you are and the sectors that you're in. But some of the ones that we talk about most within our communities are the ones that come from Building Smart or that are known as Open BIM. Things like IFC, which in many ways, I would say, provides the foundation of a schema for this diagram that I was showing here. Almost every single one of these is represented in IFC in one way or the other. IDS, which you're probably hearing more and more about, which is effectively, it's an information delivery specification, but to be more specific, it's a data delivery specification, really, because it's not going into the document side, it's not going into the geometry side. It's very, very focused on what data do I need? And then we have things like BCF, which focuses a lot on issue tracking and so on and so forth. The third thing that we need is classification systems. Why do we need classification systems? I'll come and say something is a fire door, for example, and I'll describe it in a very specific way. And then someone else may describe that subtly differently. The problem is we need to make sure that we're all speaking the same language as organizations, and especially when it comes to being able to make value of the data, classification becomes more and more important. So for example, what you really want is 2 different supply chain members describing the same thing consistently. You want your multiple projects to describe things consistently. And then if we have described these consistently, we can start deriving insight from this data at scale in order to inform better decision-making. Very simple example. If you start looking at things like material, for instance, I, as a contractor, should want to understand how much I'm spending on different types of material and different commodities across my projects. It's very, very, very hard to do that if I don't have consistency in the way that I've described that material. If I'm someone in the planning phase, I may want to understand how many fire doors am I going to be buying, not in this one project as a contractor, but in all of my projects or across all of my portfolio. because that becomes important because I can then start having economies of scale and I can get better prices in the way that I'm doing things. But I can only do that if I've described things in a consistent language. And then the last thing we need is systems. So we need software that will support us in gathering this data together and collecting it and taking care of it and processing it and governing it and using it and so on and so forth. And there are a range of types of systems. And there are a range of approaches. I think like one extreme approach would be go open up something like a Microsoft Access or a Microsoft SQL or SQL Server and just start using these databases, for example. But some of the most common ones that we'll see, and I would say are dominate most right now, are construction-focused solutions and no-code or low-code platforms. Would suspect most people here are more familiar with construction-focused solutions. What do I mean by a construction-focused solution? Every single software vendor, effectively, that you've seen is a point solution that's focused on a very specific aspect of work. So for example, I'm seeing some software vendors come and say, I focus on things like BIM execution plans, or I focus on things like EIRs. They're providing a point solution for BIM that doesn't connect with anything else. I'm seeing the same thing in the handover space. I see the same thing in the sustainability space. Someone comes and says, we shouldn't have this on Word on Excel. We should have this in a system that's collaborative and that's web-based and that's a bit better looking. And then they build a very specific solution that does that in a very, very specific way. What they're good at, usually, these types of solutions, is they have best practice for a specific workflow. One would hope, at least. That's really why people start gravitating towards them. They go, I want to learn about how I put together an EIR or an O&M or a health and safety file or a sustainability report. I'll go into that software and it will have that pre-configured for me and I'll use that. The problem with that, though, is every single one of us gets one of these applications and then goes, can I change this? Can I change that? And then that starts getting more and more difficult. The answer is usually no, or there are limits to what I can change. The second issue becomes they're siloed from other systems. They do not connect well to other systems and to all of these other data sets that we were speaking about earlier. And if we think about it, as we've been saying, a lot of the challenges, there are this range of analysis that I have to be doing as companies. And all of these things should connect to each other and should speak to each other. And all of that becomes a challenge. I either need to pull data via API if these systems have an API and then figure out how to integrate it, and so on and so forth. So it ends up being a very big challenge. There's then a learning curve for every single new tool. Often they don't actually have not many of them at least have a true data foundation, if I'm honest. And increasingly what I'm seeing, especially with like bigger companies, in the US, I'm hearing crazy numbers, like 2,000 software solutions within the stack of leading design firms and consultancies. Here in the UK, I know a lot of the main contractors have in the range of 200 software solutions within their stack, because they'll need things that do something very specific for that very specific job. Because the way they do infrastructure is different from the way they'll do energy, and it's different from the way that they'll approach residential, and then they end up needing to have different systems for different things. Or my sustainability person needs something, and then someone who's looking at the Building Safety Act needs something else, and so on and so forth. The other approach that I personally think is very interesting is no-code and low-code platforms. So they usually have the flexibility of Excel and Word, but they're usually focused on helping and empowering you to build your own process on top of their platforms. They usually do, so things like Airtable, there is a lot of focus on data. Palantir is on the top end of all of this. but like insanely expensive as a solution. But you also have the likes of Smartsheets, Monday.com, Coda, Notion, Confluence, Jira, Asana. Like they're all plays on these concepts. What's very good about them is they tend to be really flexible, but then it takes time to get them to work for the industry. You then need to integrate with all of the other AEC software like Autodesk Construction Cloud and so on and so forth. And then you need to figure out how the processes should be built on these types of solutions, which is really what these types of solutions have figured out. And then subtle, but they're not very well suited for project-based collaboration. They're usually much more suited for internal workflows. And that's why organizations end up reverting back to Excel and Word. Where we come in as a company and as a software is we provide a platform that bridges the gap between the rigid tools that we know in the industry and between these complex and flexible platforms that currently exist as well, that give you the flexibility and the power to do what you need. And we do that with data at our core. So rather than having Word and Excel files, you have web-based hubs. Teams can come and access. They can fill in the data that they have. We know that you have data in many different other systems. That's why we connect to these other systems and we help you pull data from these systems. We're not moving, it's not just the files and so on and so forth. We don't do that. There are other companies that are much better than us at moving files around. I see John is here. Like definitely when it comes to like transfer of information between different systems, I'd speak to him. But when it comes to accessing data and pulling that data and making it useful within a spreadsheet-like context or within a document, that's the kind of thing that we're very good at and that we're really focused on unlocking. We've been working with teams across the supply chain. So we work with owners, we work with consultancies, we work with supply chain members, general contractors, design firms, and many, many others. And every one of these here is someone or is a company that is building processes on top of the platform and is using it day to day. Now, what that has given us is a lot of insight about how these organizations use data. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to scroll through this. I think what's really, really important is some will see what I'm seeing as a sales pitch. It isn't, in that what I literally have in the screen is Power BI. You could technically get there in various ways. Mortar is supporting these companies and is a key enabler for what they're after. But fundamentally, I think our community, a lot of the members of our community are some of the best at actually leveraging data to drive performance. So Kier is a very, very good example where what they've done is they've taken information delivery planning as a process, and they've put that at the heart of how they assess supply chain performance, of how they assess work packages, of how they understand and evidence their payments and a lot of their decision making. They're also using that to inform a lot of what they have to be doing when it comes to the Building Safety Act. So I think what's really, really important is they've taken something like an information delivery plan. They've taken the data within the information delivery plan. They've been able to use that on 40 different projects by driving consistency, and they're feeding that into central Power BI dashboards in order to give executives a view of how their projects are performing in real time. The second example is the Ministry of Justice. So the Ministry of Justice is leveraging data to drive performance as well. What they're doing is the Ministry of Justice, for context, is one of the largest estate owners here in the UK, and they're responsible for a range of things from prisons to courts and so on and so forth. And what they've done is they've been able to take all of this data that they had in many different viewpoint instances and in various other systems and various spreadsheets. They've brought that together into an environment, and what they've really aspired to do is create a data-centric and purpose-led approach driven by interoperability. So they're connecting key performance indicators to trackers, to their BIM libraries and their requirements and their audit trails in order to actually inform their decision making and understand how their projects and portfolio is performing. Mott MacDonald is actually a very, very, very good example of a company that used data in a way that I hadn't actually imagined. So we as a software provide data about audit trails. So we have a log of every single change that happens in the platform. And what they were able to do with that data is to understand the implementation and the mobilization of their trackers. So they were able to see who's filling in what, when are they filling it, and as a result, they were then able to nudge these people and to get them to complete the tasks that they had to complete. And then off the back of that, they were then able to derive insight on the project progress and one of the largest infrastructure projects in the US. There are many, many other examples. You'll also be hearing from two amazing community members later today. You'll have Andy Bootle and you'll have Megan, who'll be speaking about different perspectives, and I'm sure they'll be speaking more broadly than just Mortar, but I'm sure they'll be touching on that. So you'll be hearing from them also firsthand. Babcock is assuring IFC files and data in order to use that to make sure that they're ready for handover. And they're really leveraging level of information needs and data requirements in order to support in that. Now, there are many others. Mace is driving real-time visibility on performance tracking. Really, what they've actually been focusing on tracking is design review processes. They wanted to understand how long is a review process taking, who takes longer to review, and so on and so forth. And they've been able to assess that, and they've been able to save time along the way. And Digital Gorilla is doing a lot when it comes to proactive, providing a proactive service effectively for data assurance. Now I want to leave you with this. And sometimes I get asked why we named ourselves Mortar as a company. So we all know bricks, and bricks exist, and they've been really, really key in all of our infrastructure and in our architecture. But what brings this together is Mortar. And we think data has the potential to do the exact same thing for the industry. And if we do that, if we use data as Mortar, we can connect our workflows. We can get these things to actually work with each other and to stand up and to deliver what they need to deliver in order for us to meet the challenges we spoke about earlier, from productivity to building safety, to better handover, to less carbon intensive buildings, to better resource use, to more accountability, to more trust. Data is the mortar that can help us solve the industry's problems and deliver together. And with that in mind, I want to thank you all for listening to me today. I hope you found this useful, and I hope you found it interesting. And I'm sure you'll be hearing from many others in the community today. You'll find all of their perspectives interesting. They have different perspectives for you today. We have different people who are going to be joining us and who are going to be speaking and sharing their experience and sharing their learnings about why data is important and why data governance is important. They're all people who are engaged within the data governance stage and the data governance group. If you also want to engage, please do join us. Please do join the group, and please do push for data as the mortar of the industry.